All right, my friends, welcome to the Escalate video. And this follows the book that hopefully you've already read and a lot of the other content that's out there. And it's gonna walk you step by step through the escalation process and what this looks like. So a few things to get on the table right away. This is all about getting unstuck and building momentum. So if you are working toward a goal and you just find that you're struggling to get there, that you're struggling to make progress, that you're struggling to get activities done, that's what Escalate is all about. Now, something that I want to be very clear about, the prevailing idea out there for getting unstuck is to constantly de-escalate. So what people say is, well, I didn't get myself to do this activity. Maybe I'll choose a much smaller activity and I'll try that. And every time you de-escalate, you choose a weaker and weaker activity to perform. Escalation flips that on its head and it says, if the activity or method you chose to use didn't work, you have to choose a more powerful way of doing it, not a less powerful way. And so there are three principles that we're going to talk about. The first one is to simplify. It's to start small. And we do that by unpacking, ordering, and prioritizing. The second step is the escalation process. It's how do I move from a weaker method of accomplishing a task to a more powerful method of accomplishing a task. And the third one is pruning, which says, how do I get rid of the tasks that don't ultimately need to be done? So let's jump right into this, starting with the first one. Unpack, order, and prioritize. If you're gonna escalate your method, your approach to getting an activity done, you need to start small. So we start with the smallest method and approach and activity, and then we build up on those activities. Versus starting it really big and constantly de-escalating, we start at the smallest point. We start at the point where I can give the least amount of effort and get the biggest result. That's where I start. And when I reach a point where that least amount of effort isn't doing it, then I escalate it. There are three rules to unpacking, to ordering, and to prioritizing. I think 3 is a really nice number. It simplifies things and it forces you to prioritize and direct your attention towards some very specific things. So the first rule is that you can only unpack a maximum of 3 levels at a time. The second rule is that you can only order a maximum of 3 activities at each level. And then the last one is that you can only prioritize a maximum of 3 activities at any given time. So you see that it's starting to follow that process of 3s. Now let me show you how you unpack. Unpacking has taken on a lot of different terms throughout the years. You can call it chunking, you can call it segmenting, you can call it breaking it down. All it is it's taking your big goal, whatever it is that you want to achieve, and it's breaking it down into smaller and smaller activities. And the reason we do that is because sometimes these big goals, especially if they're very audacious, can feel overwhelming. They're too big, and when I look at that really big goal, I think, holy cow, how am I gonna do that? But by breaking it down into smaller and smaller activities, those individual activities that it will take to accomplish the goal feel much more manageable. And that's motivating when I look at something and I know I can get it done. So I'm assuming you have this SMART goal in place. Now, the first step is to define or identify what are a few activities that it's going to take to accomplish this goal. And so in the book, I use the example of writing this course, and I've broken it into 3 smaller activities: to produce the content, film a video, and figure out a way to disseminate. Maybe those 3 activities or 4 that you've just broken it down into still feel really big. Well, just unpack another level. So take one of those activities and say, okay, what's it gonna take to get that activity done? I've broken it into 3 even smaller activities of doing some research, of writing my own thoughts, and then getting some feedback. And I would do that for each of the activities that I broke down at the first level. So I unpacked one level. Now I've unpacked another level and I've gotten even more granular, even more detailed, and those activities are even smaller and simpler. So hopefully at this point you're starting to feel some motivation. You're starting to see that, yeah, there's a lot of little activities that need to be done, but each of those activities is very doable, very manageable. I can do that. If you still need to get some motivation, you still need to see how it ties in, you can unpack one more level. So you can take each of those activities. At this point, you should have 3 primary activities and then 9 below that. You can unpack one more level, but remember the rule, you can only unpack 3 levels, and that's to keep it simple and not get overwhelmed by so many activities. So if you need to, you can unpack each one of those activities at a 3rd level. And at that point, you would have a maximum of something like 39 activities. And that's still a lot, but each of those activities is very small and very doable, very manageable. And so you're starting at the simplest, smallest form, and that way you can escalate to more powerful things. So remember, a maximum of 3 levels when you unpack your goal into smaller activities. Once you have unpacked your goal, you need to order it. So some of these activities, just by nature, have to be done in order for another activity to be done. That is the process of ordering. It's simply looking at the activities that you have to do, and it's saying which ones have to come first. Remember the rule, as you are ordering these activities, only order a maximum of 3 activities per level. And again, the idea of 3 and limiting it and keeping to these rules is to simplify your next steps. We are all focused on immediate action that you can take. So you have now unpacked a couple of levels and broken your big goal into small achievable goals so you can start at the smallest point and escalate up. You have ordered them so you know which ones need to come first and which ones have to wait for other activities to be done. And the 3rd step is to do things the right way or to prioritize. So you have all of these activities, you have them ordered, and now you need to define what are the critical few activities that matter the most. So if I'm looking at mine and I think about those 3 that I broke down, the critical one is writing it. So you're going through your activities and you're saying which ones are the critical few. Remember, you have a maximum of 3 unpacking levels, you have a maximum of 3 orders, and you have a maximum of 3 priorities. And that really directs your attention to a few critical activities that you should start with today. And they're going to be small, simple activities because you already unpacked. So let's jump into Escalate, which is the key, it's the crux of this whole thing, and it's a process that you have to get very good at following and obeying the rules. So there are 3 rules to escalation. Rule number 1, you must escalate an activity anytime that it fails. So if you made a commitment and you said you were going to perform an activity a specific way and you don't do it, you have to escalate it to the next level. You have to choose a more powerful way of getting the activity done. This, as I remind you, flips the kind of traditional way of doing it on its head, because the traditional way would say, well, if this didn't work, I need to choose a smaller way to do it. Now we're escalating to a more powerful way of getting the activity done. Rule number 2, you have to pay for the escalation. You don't get to escalate an activity and just get away scot-free. You have to pay for it in some way, and I'll show you as we come up what that looks like. And then rule number 3, you can only escalate an activity 3 times, and I'll show you exactly what happens once you've escalated an activity 3 times. There is this sheet that you have access to. You don't have to use this, you can use whatever you want. This is a very simple one. It helps put your activities in order. It lists what priority they are as well as what order they are, and then you actually choose your escalation for each of those. So the way that this process starts is you have your list of activities, already broken them down to the smallest level, so you're picking one to start with, and then you say, the method. How am I going to get this activity done? What am I going to do in order to accomplish this activity? And I have a list that you have access to that shows all of the potential escalations. So let's say that I'm starting with my activity of researching and that I have that as an activity. My first escalation for research, I'm not a big fan of research. It's one that I would procrastinate. It's one that I may or may not get done. My first approach to research would be the 10-minute rule. And the 10-minute rule says, look, I'm gonna work on it for 10 minutes, and once those 10 minutes are up, I give myself permission to stop. So I would say my first escalation, in order to get the research done, is to work on it in 10-minute blocks. Once that 10 minutes is up, then I can move on. So I would capture this on the sheet. My first escalation is 10-minute rule. And then I track whether or not I do that. If I find that, you know what, I couldn't even get myself to use the 10-minute rule to get this work done, then I document on the tracking sheet that it didn't work. And so now I'm gonna escalate to a more powerful way of getting things done. The 10-minute rule didn't work. I need something more powerful to get that activity done. Now, the next escalation from the 10-minute rule would be a power session. I'm gonna block out 1 hour. I'm gonna make sure that there are 0 distractions, and I'm gonna commit that 1 hour to doing this work. But I don't get away scot-free. I didn't do what I said I was gonna do. And the idea of this course is to build momentum. Well, you can't build momentum if you let yourself get away with not taking action. So I have to pay for that escalation in some way. So for me, maybe research is worth, I don't know, maybe it's worth about $50. So I say, okay, I'm gonna escalate. So that cost me $15 to escalate to a power session. So I actually put away that $15 somewhere. Whether it's in a separate account, whether it's in my drawer next to my bed, whatever it is, I put away that $15 because I had to escalate. So I'm holding myself accountable to the escalation, and I'm paying for it. If you don't have the money to pay for it, you can pay for escalation in other ways. So you can pay for it by getting up earlier in the morning. Maybe you wake up a half hour earlier because you didn't do it, and part of your power session you have to fit into your day somewhere. Maybe you pay for your escalation with a different activity. So you say, well, I've got to get myself engaged and active somehow, so I'm gonna go, watch my friends' kids for a night, or I'm gonna go exercise when I hadn't planned on it. You have to pay for it some way, and the reason for this is, again, about building momentum. The more that you take action, even if it's not directly related to your goal, the better you will get at taking action. And so by paying for it, you hold yourself accountable, you make sure that the escalation is actually paid for, and you start to build this habit of taking action. So you pay for the escalation. And then I document that on my sheet. I say, okay, I escalated it to the next piece, and I chose a power session. Well, let's say that I block out an hour, and I get into my office here, and I say, all right, I've got this hour blocked off. And then I think, well, man, research probably isn't gonna take me a full hour. It'll probably take me 30 minutes. Maybe I could, just watch this YouTube video about, LeBron dunking on people. Before I know it, I'm watching, I don't know, kittens in outer space. I'm doing who knows what, but I've now wasted 30 minutes of that 1 hour session. And once I hit the 30 minutes, I say, well, geez, 30 minutes probably isn't going to be enough, and I haven't even gotten started. You know what? I'll reschedule my power session. Boom. That escalation failed as well. I didn't do what I said I was going to do. So I mark it down on the sheet that it failed. I paid for it in order to escalate it to the next level. So I escalate it one more time. I put another $15 in the drawer, and now I'm at escalation 3. And since I moved past the power session, now I have some accountability and rewards I initiate, or maybe I escalate it to collaboration, where I actually invite somebody to help me do it, but I escalate to a more powerful method of getting the activity done. So let's say that I choose to escalate to collaboration. So I say, man, I'm just not getting it done by myself, but I'll bet if I schedule an hour with somebody else and I ask them to come help me, I could get it done. I schedule that time, I find a buddy to come help me do it, and I set out that time to actually do it. If the escalation works, great, you move on to the next activity, right? I mean, that hopefully is clear at this point, that if it works and you do the power session, you do the 10-minute rule, you get the activity done, you're just moving to the next activity. And the vast majority of the time, between escalation 1, 2, and 3, you will get the activity done. Now, let's say though that I moved to escalation 3, I went past the power session, it didn't work, now I'm doing collaboration. And let's say that I wake up the day of, and I know that I have an hour scheduled, and I think, you know what, I've got so many other things going on, I'm just not gonna do this, and I call up my buddy and I say, hey, you know what, I need to cancel today, let's reschedule. Well, now I have reached 3 escalations, and I have failed at each one of those, but I've paid for it each time. So now Escalation 3 failed. I put another $15 in my drawer at $45 in my drawer, which is pretty close to the $50 budget I set. And I'm out of escalations because I can only escalate 3 times. If you reach 3 escalations and all of them have failed, you move immediately to outsourcing. Look, do not let one activity stall your entire goal by continuing to circle and cycle and reiterate and just create this downward spiral about one activity. If you have tried 3 different methods of getting the activity done, and each method has been more powerful, and you still haven't gotten the activity done, outsource it. So at this stage, I would say, okay, look, for whatever reason, I am just not getting this done. I've paid for my escalation either through money, through time, or through some other activity. Now I have to outsource it. I just have to get this activity done in order to keep making progress, in order to get unstuck. So I will outsource this activity. And so I choose a method or a mechanism for outsourcing the activity. For this one, for research, I have $45 available because I paid $15 each time I escalated it. So the first method of outsourcing is simply to ask somebody else. So ask friends, family, colleague, mentors. Say, I really need this research done. Is there anything you can do to help me do this research? The second way of getting it done or outsourcing it is to offer to trade with somebody. If you know somebody's working on something and you have an interest in that activity, but you're procrastinating this one, trade. Say, hey, I really need research done and I know you're working on this. I will help you with that activity if you'll help me with my research or whatever the activity is that you're struggling with. And you can trade time, you can trade skills, you can focus on those things that you're interested in, you can trade sleep if you have to by getting up an hour earlier in order to get it done. And then the last method is probably the most obvious method, and that is to strictly pay to actually have it done. So reach out to your network and say, I have $45, go to websites like Fiverr or Upwork or Pay Per Hour or Elancer or any myriad of websites where you can get activities done. Use apps or hire a VA. Now, if you do this, if you escalate to the point of outsourcing, it will get done. That's the point of this. But the majority of the time between escalation 1, 2, and 3, you will find a way to get it done. So I promise you, you're not going to be outsourcing every activity. But by outsourcing these activities, you ensure that you continue to make progress and you don't let these small, tiny activities prevent you from accomplishing your goal. And that's where people struggle, is they get caught up on one little activity and it prevents them from accomplishing their goal. We are choosing constantly more powerful methods and mechanisms to get work done. And when we do that, we get it done. And if we can't get it done for whatever reason, we outsource it so we do not stall in our progress. Now, you would be surprised at some of the things you can do to outsource your actual work or activities. I mean, you can get somebody to do virtually anything you can think of, from doing your laundry, to researching, to writing, to cleaning your house, to delivering things. You can get almost anything done by outsourcing. So don't let that little activity stop you from making progress. You don't just get to outsource. Remember, there's a rule to this. You have to pay for that outsourcing. And that is what builds your ability to take greater action in the future. This is a long-term approach and method that will truly build your ability to get yourself to take action, because you're paying for it, often through action, in order to accomplish something you would procrastinate otherwise. So now you have escalated. Hopefully you get it done between escalations 1, 2, or 3. If not, outsource, get it out of the way, and move forward. Now, the last step is step number 3, and it is to prune. And pruning is simply remembering or recognizing that, look, of all the stuff that I have to do, there are a critical few that really matter. Now, here's the key with pruning. The one rule is that your goal remains intact. So you don't sacrifice your goal, but you keep flexible in your approach to accomplishing it. And pruning follows this general rule of the Pareto principle. So a lot of times people ask, well, how much can I prune? How much should I be outsourcing? How much is appropriate to outsource? I would say this: you should always try to own the critical few activities. So whatever you have prioritized as big ones, you should try your best to own those. Those 20% that will produce 80% of the results. That other 80% of activity, the many trivial that produces only 20% of the results, that's the kind of stuff that you should be escalating, getting done quickly, finding ways to trade to get done, and outsourcing when you can't get it done any other way. One thing that you will find in pruning is that there really are a critical few. It is not 1,000 activities that ultimately need done. There are a critical few that will move you toward your goal. A lot of the others you'll find if you prune or you let them slide, that you can move on without them. So if you've tried all of these other methods and there are lingering activities that were out there, but you've been able to make progress, just ask yourself, does it really, really need done? What would life look like if I just moved on beyond this? Now, I want to show you on the Excel tracking sheet, you have step 1 where you can actually unpack, order, and prioritize. You have step 2 where you can capture the activity and each escalation, whether it was successful or not and whether you paid for it. And then in step 3, you have pruning. And when you prune, I would suggest don't just drop it off 100%, but capture what is the activity that I'm pruning? What is the activity I'm letting slide? What are the acceptable trade-offs? What am I willing to let go of if this activity doesn't get done? That way you don't lose something that's really, really key to you. And then the last 2 are really for the future reference for learning and progressing, which is what was the measurable impact of letting that activity go? And then what was the lesson learned? And the reason we capture that is to help you start to see which activities are really the critical few. By doing this time and time again, you get better and better at which activities you prune. That is Escalate in a nutshell. I ran through it quickly, but just remember that it is 3 critical steps. You start small, and the way you do that is by unpacking, ordering, and prioritizing. You escalate. So you choose how you're gonna get the activity done. If you don't get it done using that method, you escalate to a more powerful method of getting the activity done, and you pay for those escalations in order to build willpower, in order to build momentum, in order to build ability to take action. And then ultimately you reach step 3, where some activities you choose to prune so that they don't bog you down and hold you up. If you follow this process of escalating, if you follow each of these steps, you will get unstuck and you will build momentum. You will continue progressing, and as you see that progress, whether you're outsourcing it, whether you're using power sessions, whatever method you're using, as you see progress, it will be motivating. And the combination of this approach, by getting yourself to take action, by escalating activities and choosing more powerful ways of doing it, by starting small, the combination of this approach is a powerful one that will ensure you accomplish your goals if you continue to use it. So thanks so much for listening, for paying attention to this video, for diving into the content. Please know there's a lot of other content and tools out there. I'll be sharing all of these with you. My friends, take this stuff, go out there, take action, and make progress. All the best.